Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that had the biggest influence on his journey to becoming a faculty member of the Shift Network, a sought-after intuitive healing facilitator, an entrepreneur, and a 3 times best-selling author is Dave Markowitz, whose first self-published book, Self-Care for the Self-Aware, a guide for highly sensitive people, empaths, intuitives, and healers, was on Amazon's top 20 list for 41 consecutive months. Dave Markowitz, welcome.
So great to be here. Excuse me. Wow, I meant so great to be here.
Good to have you, Dave. So you said that picking your top 10 was a lot more challenging than you thought it would be. In fact, you had 2 goes at it, didn't you?
Maybe more that I didn't tell you about. Yeah, when you first mentioned it, first, thank you for doing this. I think it's such an awesome idea and so outside the box thinking and just like really acting upon that. So I just love it. When you first mentioned it, I said, "Oh my God, I would just love to be part of that." So thank you for inviting me here. And when you invited me, I said, "Oh, that should be easy." And so I had a couple, right off the bat that I wrote down, and then I just kind of got stuck. And nothing else. I looked at, I don't know if you can see in the screen, but there's a stack of books, bookshelf behind me. I looked through those. Those are, I went to my next rack of books and looked through those. Now I had about 20, 25. Said, "Oh my God, how am I going to get this down to 10?" So, the work that I do is always, when I remember at least, is to really check in and say what's coming up within me around what's happening, as opposed to blaming and looking outside answers. Say, "Wow, isn't that interesting? This is old, like childhood, maybe school kind of things about I got to get it right. I gotta get my check mark from Sandy, And so it's like, oh, now I'm putting more pressure on myself. But it was at least it became clear of why it was so challenging that I had to get it right. So I kind of sat with those feelings a little bit and processed them. And then next thing you know, they were just flying out, just like, oh, that one and that one, of course, that one and that one. And then I had it about 12 or 13. I said, now what? So it was fun and challenging and wonderful, right? It really showed me something still within myself that says, I got to get it right. And I imagine some people in the audience can relate to that. So just putting light on the subject.
It's really interesting. I mean, it takes you back, doesn't it? It takes you back to who you were when. And then you think, oh, I've changed. I'm not that person
Hopefully.
anymore. And you begin to see your own kind of trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. And I think anyone on the path knows we're never going to get to that plateau and just stay there forever. It's a roller coaster. So
Yeah.
I'm still learning and will be forever learning to ride the roller coaster. And like you said, like if it takes you back to a certain day or event or period of time, so be it. It's showing up for healing. And I truly believe that. I believe whatever's going on, whatever feels like a blockage is actually really an opportunity. So I kind of dove into that and came up with, I think, 10 good ones.
Did
We'll
you
see.
use any particular kind of yardstick? Okay, it's the books
Mhm.
that this, or it's, ones that kind of leave an impression with you and, they're still in your mind.
I think it was more the latter, the ones that left the lasting impressions. There are a few more than others, of course.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, something that seemed profound at the time slash lasting impressions. I think I went with that kind of mindset.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, the first one on your list, which is in our top 10 of all the top 10s, no surprise there, is a book that I think came to you, you said, and when you first looked at it, you thought it was psychobabble, new age woo-woo, and with the worst parts of quantum mechanics blended in.
Mm.
So tell our readers, our viewers, what that book was. Or do you want to tell them?
Please feel free to remind me what I wrote. Okay.
I don't know whether you've told the author this, but that book that you thought was psychobabble and new age woo-woo at first was Conversations with God, book one, An Uncommon Dialogue by Neil Donald Walsh, which was published in 1995.
Wow.
So what changed your mind?
Well, first, I've spoken to Mr. Walsh a couple of very brief times, and I never said anything about your book is woo and drove me crazy. I just thanked him for really stepping out on a limb. I mean, that's a pretty big limb to step out onto, especially in the 1990s.
Yeah,
So something said stick with it. The first chapter, especially, I thought was it just I just couldn't follow it at all. And I think most people might just throw the book out or use it for firewood or something if the first chapter makes absolutely no sense. But something kept me going. And next thing you know, I'm literally reading every page, front to back, over and over and over. And it was shortly after I developed the channeling practice, the ability to communicate with spirit and source energy. I thought was pretty clearly, and I still think it's pretty clearly, but we all have our own stuff that gets in the way. And I remember reading certain sections and really then feeling in saying, is that true? Like it was so, I don't know, grandiose, so different than anything I'd read before in typical spiritual books that I literally kept saying, "Is that true? Is that?" And I kept hearing, "Yes, yes." And I said, and it was kind of like, "Well, I wrote the book. Of course, I know it's true," kind of thing. That kind of voice coming through me.
mm,
So I stayed with it, and it really, I don't know, just opened up so much. Like you said, it probably has for millions upon millions and millions. Everyone I lent it to, it was a struggle to get it back. So I eventually just got a second copy, maybe a
yeah,
third. I don't remember. And I joined a study group around it where other people, like mine, were able to discuss it and, just really opened up my mind to a whole new dimension of religion versus spirituality, what resonates with me. Not that any of it's wrong or bad, of course. I remember going to see him speak live shortly after that came out. He was just really present and funny and just felt like someone that you wanted to listen to. So kudos to him. And I think it was Penguin Random House. Someone took a chance on at what at the time was a very daring book.
yeah,
I think it
yeah.
paid off.
Yeah. Do you recall at what stage of your spiritual journey you were at then?
Wow, how do you even label the stages? Gosh, intermediate.
Intermediate. I mean, so it wasn't like completely new stuff for you.
Some of it was confirming what I actually most of it or a good amount of it was confirming what I kind of felt I intuitively knew, but it was just putting it in words that my left brain really appreciated. And maybe that's the best summary of the whole thing to begin with.
Yeah.
Um, and it confirmed and also expanded my reality. And, if you're thinking about a book or any kind of experience, what more do you want? I mean, sure, you might want to numb out for some experiences, but for expansion, growth, understanding, what are we all doing here and why? And that this energy called God is available to all of us. I mean, that's quite a breakthrough for me, considering my upbringing, and I think a lot of people also who were just learning that God doesn't speak to anyone, except those couple of old men, of course, 2,000 and 5,000 years ago, kind of thing. Um, it was just really mind blowing, and just I'm very grateful for his work, and I think he's a great
Mm,
great human being and quite a messenger for the planet.
indeed. Book number 2, When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, published in 2003.
That was 2003. I didn't even know that. Wow.
What
Anyone
was
who listens to Gabor Mate and is not taken in by his story, I would question. Right? He's so authentic, so real, so vulnerable with his experiences. He never claims to be above anyone. He never claims he's mastered anything. I think that's very appealing. And he's talking, again, he was kind of confirming all these things that I had learned. Being a medical intuitive, I was really into this mind body connection thing, and also really just wanted to teach it. I personally got a lot of value understanding how my body responds to the mind. And, again was putting words on that whole process. And he was talking about, when the body says no, like there's a certain point when your body will tell you you've had enough, whether it's chocolate or pursuing a particular goal that's either out of reach or needs to be achieved more with more compassion and slowly. There's your body's always speaking to you, and as a medical intuitive, obviously love that whole idea because I teach people, not just I don't just do the readings, but I teach people eventually how to do it themselves. Listen to your body. Sometimes it's very simple. It's just saying no. So many aches, pains, and illness that we're dealing with that in Western medicine are either uncurable or not understandable or idiopathic. There is an answer for all of these things. And
Mhm.
I had been teaching those concepts for years. And then his book came to me. And personally, because I'm not a medical doctor, to hear a medical doctor who I was taught to really have reverence and respect for, to hear a medical doctor put almost what seemed like my work into his words, and so that a left brain Western mind can appreciate it, that was pretty powerful. So I kind of, got a little new age validation there.
Book number 3, Spiritual Enlightenment, The
Mm,
Damnedest Thing, from the Enlightenment Trilogy, Book 1 by Jed McKenna, published in
yeah.
2002.
These older books. What is that saying? Oh, nothing. Um, Mr. McKenna's work is really powerful. For those that haven't read it, he claims to be an enlightened being. And I think what really jumped out to me was he didn't have the experiences or the descriptions of what at least I understood an enlightened being to be, to act like, to speak like, to do. He made it somewhat more grounded, which kind of seems,
Accessible.
yeah, maybe a little more accessible that way, and also took out the illusion that once you get to that place that you can never be hurt. At least this is how I understood enlightenment. And he was saying, "Oh, you can be hurt, you just deal with it differently." So it seemed
Mhm.
very grounded to me. And, part of me, because he spoke about this retreat that he has, I got inquisitive and I looked up. I couldn't find anything about him, about his retreat. And part of me was saying, is this a story? I don't even know if this is true. And then I had to question that and say, well, even if it isn't, so what? Right? It doesn't have to be true to be powerful, to be mind expanding. So I thought that was kind of cool also. And, one of his books, I don't remember if it was that one, starts out where he's like being chased by was that like law enforcement or a neighborhood watch team or something like that. And he's just enjoying hiding from them in the bushes. I mean, how many books about enlightenment talk about something like that as a fun experience? No, I don't think he's, you know, advocating go be a menace, but it's just the situation he got himself into. And, again, he seemed very real, very grounded and accessible. And also what was kind of cool was, sometimes if I'm reading something and a question is being presented within that text, my own mind will say, well, how will I answer that? And he always had a different answer than how I would have answered it. So I said, this is really good. This is really challenging me to grow. So I kept on with that one.
Well, Jed McKenna also wrote the 4th book on your list, which is
Yeah.
Spiritual Warfare. And this is book 3. And you say that you skipped book 2. Tell us why you skipped book
Mhm.
2.
I didn't skip it as far as reading it. I just didn't resonate with it as much.
Yeah.
So I didn't list it. It was more. I don't know if the word is parable. It wasn't as much of a lived experience that he was describing that at least I could relate to, and I didn't make it wrong or anything. It was just sort of like someone like reading a book or did like reading poetry. It seemed more like poetry to me, which for
Mm,
some people is just, "Oh my god, sign me up." For me, it's like, no." I just I just can't relate to poetry in the written form anyway.
mm.
So, it was just a very different format, and, yeah, I mean, I think it was good, but it wasn't in my top 10.
So, what did you like about book 3 then?
Same idea, his groundedness and his experiences, his teachings, that he's very fact-based around enlightenment, which again seems sort of contradictory to what how I understood it, or it just seems so nebulous. And he was saying, it's okay if you don't believe me. This is my experience. Almost, followed by a period, right? Like his from what I could read and gather and sense, there was no attachment at all to anyone believing anything he says ever.
Well, it's interesting. You said that he doesn't have a social media presence, no online videos, no information about where he teaches. How on earth does one find him?
That's what made me wonder, is this guy even real? Because like you said, who doesn't have some social media presence now?
Yeah,
So I don't know. I guess just his books. And,
but they're worth reading.
I
These
think
two,
so.
anyway.
Yeah, for me, definitely those.
Mm,
I think he's got more than just those three, but that's the trilogy, as he calls
mm,
them. And the bookends of the trilogy to me were really powerful, and just yeah, I keep it next. I don't think I'm alone. We keep a book next to our nightstand, and
mm.
we just either randomly open a page. I like to listen intuitively for a number. So just last night, I heard 114. I picked up his book, and it's, oh, okay, that relates to what I'm dealing with.
Mhm. Well, book number 5 is by an old friend of ours, Conversations with the Z's, book
Yeah.
1, The Energetics of the New Human Soul, Lee Harris, which was also published in 2002.
Lee, I don't know if you know, I actually met him on your show about 12 years ago. In
I recall that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was wild. And he and I just looked at each other, and it was kind of like instant, okay,
Recognition. Yeah.
recognition there. And maybe just because I'm balding and he's completely bald, I don't know. We have related on that level. Um, but yeah, there was a beautiful recognition there, and we've stayed in touch. And he comes to town, we connect and hang out and tell stories and compare experiences. And his books are also really great for expanding the mind in a similar kind of way to Jed's, where I would think a particular answer would be coming,
Yeah.
and something
Yeah.
comes from left field. And some of it was, a bit beyond my current understanding, and that's okay, right? And that's part of, why I think it's good to read books, to expand our understanding. And sometimes I think we just read it to have our biased opinions confirmed, and nothing wrong with that, right? It's just nice to know the
Yeah.
intention behind what we do. So there's some of that with his, but there's also a lot of things that he channels from the Z's that I haven't yet thought about at all.
Mm.
So also highly recommended.
I think I actually quoted the wrong date there. I've got a feeling that Lee's first book was published much later, probably closer to 2012, I would imagine.
Mm.
So I don't know how that 2002 crept in there. But you're right. I mean, there's something about his books that I find, so down to earth. I like practical. Give me something I can say, "Oh, yeah," that you hadn't thought of. And that's what appeals to me, and that's what I find in Lee's books.
Yeah, definitely.
So another one that you chose, which doesn't appear as often as I think it should, and I'm always surprised by that. It's a fabulous book, The Presence Process, A Healing
Mhm.
Journey into Present Moment Awareness by Michael Brown. That one was published in 2005. I know a lot of people have done this process, and I know many people who do it every single year. And it is so darn powerful.
Mm.
I haven't had the courage to do it more than once. So tell us about your experience with it.
Yeah. It's one of those books that have sort of almost what might be called a cult following. While I was reading it, I recognized that a lot of people I knew already were also reading it. We actually formed a study group around it where we do practices based on what he speaks about in the book. And we also were encouraging people to stay with the process. One of the interesting things about that book, as you may recall, the first half of it is extremely tedious, if not boring. And he actually says, I know this is tedious and boring, but I'm setting it up. Like he's not, a man behind the curtain kind of thing. He's like, I'm setting it up so that the second half of the book will make sense to you, that you'll
Yeah.
stay with the process of actually doing the work. And how many people, self included, will read a self help book and just not really do what it says? Like the mind gets into that looking for information mode and or confirmation mode and not into the doing mode. So to me, a book can really create pathways, but something that gets you to actually do something, to apply steps, that's kind of miraculous. And having a group around you is only making it a bit easier, or maybe a lot easier. So we would
Mm,
compare notes and everything and support each other going through it and say, stick with it, stick with it. I don't think anyone in that group is still doing that every year, but many did it probably 2 or 3 times was probably the average. So for those listening, it's just a process of getting in touch with your hurt, your pain, your
yeah.
wounds. So
And
it's
it's such a simple process. You when you read it, you think, is that all there is?
yeah,
And then, you might do it several times, every day, and not have a response. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this upside the head, and you have a big response. Yeah.
yeah.
And then you understand the power of this process.
Yeah, exactly. So in my book, books plural, I try to really push doing the work. Don't just read about it.
Yeah.
I compare it to, you can't learn to ride a bicycle by reading about it. You got to get on the bike. You're going to fall a couple of times, but that's how you learn. Your muscles just become entrenched in that mindset, or the neural pathways begin to form and make it possible to ride a bike. And as they say, once you ride a bike, everything it's just like riding a bike. You never forget it. So it's pretty miraculous that that book in particular has really affected so many people so deeply. And the format of it, it's just so interesting. It's like, I know this beginning is going to be boring, and yet stick with it. And I promise you, something is going to go, poof, like you said, you get that moment of aha, and it makes it all worth it.
Yeah, and on a personal level, his own story is amazing, and also the fact that he gave this to the world, allowed people to teach it, do what they want with it. He didn't have no ownership of it other than the books. That's it. He doesn't own the process, and then he disappears, steps back, and
Yeah.
it's people get on with it.
True
Yeah,
non-attachment practice right there.
yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful thing. I do that with my work also. I never, said this is Dave's work or put my name on it, followed by energy medicine or something like that. It just doesn't really feel right to me. I think it was given to me. I can channel it, sure. I can put it in a book, and people hopefully will read it and not use it for firewood, and, and get some kind of growth and experience with it. And potentially, if they feel called to reach out to do a session or a course or something based on those words, then the book is totally worth it. As
Yeah.
one business coach said to me, your book is an expensive business card. That was interesting.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But what a business card, you know?
Potentially a mind-blowing, life-altering business card if you do it
Yeah.
right.
Exactly. Exactly. We're going to take a short break now. You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and sharing the 10 books that had the biggest influence on his life journey is best-selling author, intuitive healing facilitator, entrepreneur, and faculty member of the Shift Network, Dave Markowitz. We'll be back with more from Dave after this break. Stay tuned.
Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, And when I'm not hosting Times Media's flagship radio show, What Is Going On, and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit Sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's Sedgbeer.com, Sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and cities. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the city. And the cities are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Dave Markowitz. Book number 7, Letters from the Earth, Uncensored Writings by Mark Twain, posthumously published in 1962.
Yeah. This one, wow. I read it in college. I actually took a course called American Humor. This was actually a course. And there was a book, a list of, I think it was 10, maybe 12 books that we were supposed to read during the year. And we would just discuss them in class, which is kind of a cool idea. This one stood out more than any of the other ones by far. I wasn't really familiar with Mark Twain's work, and it really fit in with my incredibly sarcastic, angry teenage self. I thought, besides just being brilliant, the energy of it, and also was confirming, putting in words all the things that I thought but wouldn't really dare say about organized religion. I just want to be really clear. If someone is into organized religion and that makes them a better person, I am all for it. It's not up to me to say anything other than just go for it, do your thing. But for me, the way I was introduced to religion in my family of origin, A, it was kind of forced, and B, a lot of it didn't make any sense. It seemed sexist. It seemed not of the times, which I guess is kind of literal, right?
Mm.
And I was looking for someone that I wasn't consciously looking, but apparently, at least unconsciously, I was looking for someone who had a similar experience. And it's just a beautiful story. It's funny, it's sarcastic, um, wise, and to this day, I still um, recommend it to people. It's short and it's about I don't remember the specific premise of it, but basically, an angel comes to Earth and writes letters to the angelic realm and saying things like, "What's with these people? They all go to church on Sunday, but none of them actually want to be there." Oh my God. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, some might wanna be, but, in the angel's point of view, I guess they can perceive differently than we humans can. So, I mean, something like that was really important, and all of the rituals that we do to connect with spirit and all these kind of things, and again, if that's your thing, go for it. It just never resonated for me. Um, it was about hierarchies, not just within religion, but among, compared to other religions, like mine is best, mine is best. And this mindset has caused wars, I don't know, for a really long time. I don't know the exact number, but for long enough that I think we should start questioning what's in there. And also, just even if what's in there is positive for a lot of people, questioning the whole didacticism
Yeah.
that this is the only way. And we've all met someone who believes that, and God bless them if they're that passionate about it. Um, it just didn't work for me.
Mm.
So hearing, reading his words were just it was what I needed. It was a balm for a weary soul and a
Mm.
questioning soul that didn't feel safe enough to express those questions. There they were being expressed and answered. So
He
kudos.
wrote that book at a difficult time in his life. He was deep in debt. He had lost his wife and one of his daughters. Um, we don't think about authors having those kinds of experiences. They're
Mhm.
sitting up there on a shelf in their glory. We don't think of them having the kinds of issues that we have. But out of that came this, incredible letters from the dejected angel. You can understand, the dejected angel in him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think most or a lot of good art is about expressing pain. I mean,
Yeah,
I've seen um, Starry Night painting in pictures probably dozens, or if not more times, and it's nice. And when I saw it live, I felt his pain in
yeah,
every brushstroke. It
yeah,
was just an energetic transfer, and I could feel where he was when he was painting it. Of course, stories later on confirmed he was not in the best of spaces during most of his painting, and here was painting it and turning such pain into such beauty. And if we can do that as authors, you know, or painters or anything, any kind of art really, um,
yeah,
we're doing okay.
yeah. And that's exactly what the author of book number 8 did. I mean, this next book is probably the most powerful, most humbling I've ever read.
Mm.
And that is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl, published in 1946. I mean, I just lose words trying to describe that book.
Totally. Yeah, I'm with you. It's kind of beyond words. It's miraculous. It's powerful. It's a must read, in my hopefully humble opinion, for anyone about
Yeah.
anything ever, and really shows the power of the human spirit.
Mm.
I think he showed that when there's a why, you can put up with any kind of how or what.
Yes.
That's a
Yeah.
really powerful lesson. So, I mean, kudos to him or his
Mm.
spirit that is probably still guiding us in some way.
Mm. Yeah.
Just, I mean, just the story in and of itself. I don't even know if I could describe it well, but I think most people know about it. And, you know, like you
Yeah.
said, it's
His
humbling.
descriptions of being in that concentration camp and the things he witnessed, that somebody could emerge from that and not, be crazy is just phenomenal.
Yeah, completely phenomenal.
Yeah. So book number 9, I'm curious to hear what you've got to say about this book, because I have read it, and it is The Way of the Superior Man, a spiritual guide to mastering the challenges of women, work, and sexual desire by David Dada, published in 1997. And I don't know what I expected from it. I'm not even sure what I got from it, but I'm very interested to hear what a man would get from this book.
Mm. His work was introduced to me around that time, mid late 90s. A lot of people I knew in New York were really into his work, and they would invite me to men's groups. And something in me was just, nah, I don't want to do that. I wasn't even wise enough to ask what actually happens there. I just was in a no place. Right?
Mm,
And eventually I did, and I got a little bit more familiar with what's now called men's work. And then everyone there is like, you haven't read that book yet. It was like almost like a precursor to showing up at these things. So I guess I need to read it. And it helped me understand the masculine feminine dynamic in a whole new way, and relationships in general in a whole new way. And he's inviting people to go beyond, I think, what he called the first few stages of relationship, where it's all about the self, the whole egoic, what can I get from this? And then to the next stage of, giving. And then to the next stage of, how do we make this mutual? And it's almost a way of saying, how do we get from codependent to interdependent? He doesn't use those words. It's just coming to me now, which is really important advice for anyone in a relationship. I work with a lot of people, and self included. I've been in relationships that were not equal. And, if you kind of grow up as a witness to that kind of relationship, we just think it's normal. So he expanded my awareness and said, oh, we can have relationships that are more equal, that can be challenging, but in a loving kind of way. And he put out these, not quite definitions, but I'll say descriptions of what masculine energy is like and what feminine energy is like, and how they can mix. And he's very open to different, understandings of sexuality, which I think is awesome. And he's very clear about this as just a generic term for types of energy, not a particular person or sexual
yeah,
preference, which I
yeah,
think is really helpful. Um, but it helped me see how much of what I thought it was a man was supposed to be, and and compared that to what a man could be. And that alone, worth the price of admission, right? Or the $15 for the book or whatever it is, right? And it really, I don't know, it helped quantify, it helped describe, it opened a new possibility. And it also showed me why my prior relationships didn't work. Right? So if we're looking at it as everything as a learning experience, even the painful experiences, that book really kind of solidified, oh, I was in that relationship to learn about this, and I was in that relationship to learn about that, and see why they didn't work, quote unquote. They actually worked perfectly because they brought to surface things that I needed to heal.
yeah,
And he was one of the first people that invited me to look at it in that way, that, a quote unquote failed relationship is not exactly a failed relationship. That if someone is divorced 3 times, society judges that as negative. And I say, that's awesome. You're following your lead. Maybe you or the other person are growing at different rates. Hopefully it's done consciously and lovingly. But someone who's been through all that, had their heart broken, and has learned, is going to be more open to the next potential partner.
mm.
So it just, I don't know. But I'm curious to. You mentioned that you got something out of that book, but you wanted to hear from the masculine perspective. Would you mind
Yeah,
sharing yours?
I did. It was really interesting to hear the masculine perspective and understand that. I think any book that or any piece of advice or teaching that shows us who we can be rather than what we should be
Yeah.
is invaluable. And I've always been very interested in understanding what life is like, what relationships are like for others. We can't look at it purely from our own lens all the time.
I attended a workshop with him, a weekend workshop, and he would just talk for a little bit, and then he would take questions, and he would demonstrate or ask people. I mean, he asked a couple to come up to the stage, and I remember it pretty clearly. It was pretty funny and very enlightening, if you will, where the woman said, "I'm really bored with our sex life." And the guy was like, "What do you mean I'm bored?" Which is, of course, a typical male response to that kind of inquiry. But here they are in front of 100 people, willing to have it looked at. And so David Data, I can kind of feel him just kind of feeling in and just thinking what to do or how to say it, how to present it. I really feel he's pretty guided. And so he said, "Well, show us what you do." Everyone's kind of, so they kind of, get in a little cuddle position, fully clothed on the stage. And the guy said something, "Well, I usually do this. And then I usually do that. And then I usually do this." And Data just kind of yelled out, "There's your problem. Usually you're doing the same thing over and over. You know, she wants something different." And she
Mm.
just lit up. She just became completely radiant. It was like someone put words to her experience that this guy could understand. So, I won't go into more detail, but you get the idea where
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
very present and like you said, he invites people to possibility, which I think is
yeah.
invaluable.
It's interesting, isn't it? The different perspectives. What is that? I don't remember where it came from, but that old joke, I don't even know if it's a joke, it's probably a truism, about the therapist saying to the husband, well, or the wife, how many times do you make love? And she says, all the time, at least 6 times a week, all the time. And then she asked the husband, well, how many times do you make love? And he says, no, hardly ever. 6 times a week, hardly ever. And people are looking at it from completely different perspectives. Yeah. Anything that can throw light on this, perennial challenge that we have, relationships of all kinds, not just, partners, is good as far as I'm concerned. But
Including jokes.
let's move on to your last book, because your last book is a book that has been on Amazon's top 20 list for almost 4 years. And it is your own book, Self-Care for the Self-Aware, a guide for highly sensitive people, empaths, intuitives, and healers, published in 2013. That was your first book. And the fact that it was self-published, all the more kudos to you for it remaining there for so long. And I know, because people occasionally have asked me, can I say, include one of my own books? And you've said exactly the reason why I say yes, because writing that book was a transformative experience for you. Yeah.
Definitely. I had been doing sort of what might be considered more traditional medical intuition and energy healing work. I know sometimes that might seem like an oxymoron, where I'd work with someone, I'd be able to intuit, okay, you're angry at your dad. I'd work on the anger and the physical pain would go away. Well, I had what I later called an empathic awakening, where I was invited to a friend of a friend's birthday party. I didn't know till I got there that it was a party bus tour going from bar to bar to bar. And I hadn't really drank since college, which was probably easy 20 plus years earlier. And, I'm there, I'm kind of, someone else give me a ride. I can't exactly, so I figured, all right, I'm here ready. It's not my thing, but let's just make the best of it. At the end of the evening, I went out to hail a cab and it came out something like, that feels like I'm saying what a drunk or how a drunk person would speak, really, really drunk person. And I only drank water the entire evening. So this is incongruous at best. And then I gave myself the self walking test and I couldn't walk a straight line. I said, I'm drunk. How is that even possible? Finally got in a cab because, this is raising the hand as a universal signal. In the back of that cab, in a moment of clarity, which I wouldn't expect if you're feeling drunk, I heard, this is what I've been trying to tell you. What? You're an empath, and an empath absorbs energy from people that they're around. Wait a minute. What are you talking about here? So it began a whole new process. From that moment on, my entire clientele shifted. Now people are coming to me, even with that same back pain, and I'd be able to hear, wow, you're absorbing your dad's anger as opposed to being angry at him. So this
Mm.
was empath's nightmare, personified, manifest, right, in the physical form. And at first, I didn't know what to do with it, but fortunately, being reasonably intuitive, I was able to hear how to help people work through these problems that are showing up that look very different causative layers and factors than anything I'd worked with prior. And eventually, it became so prevalent. I said, okay, has to be a book. And of course, Spirit's like, let's do it. It's already written. You just got to type it.
Mm.
So the name self care for the same for the self I'm sorry, the name self care for the self aware came to me. So that's pretty good so far. Okay, what else you got? So I started writing the rest of the book, and it really just transformed me to another level in my practice, a much deeper level, where I'm able to now see things on a much bigger perspective. That most pains and illness have at least two different levels of causative factors. That's our own responses to traumas, and then there's absorbed energies from other people. And when we work with either of those with the right tools that are designed for that, which also I intuited, we can get results. Whereas before, I got some results, but nowhere near the level that I got afterwards. So I got to be part of a really unique, much more encompassing system. So that book came out. It didn't take long to write it all. It's relatively short as far as many books go. So a lot of people, I think that's kind of a turn on. Like I can read through this in a day. Great.
Mm.
Some other ones, it's like, 500 pages. Oh my God. It's going to take 10 years to get through that. And it's really powerful, has practices in there, and it transformed me into a very different person. So in the same respect as, your rules of how does it affect the author or the reader, in this case, both,
Yeah.
and on very rare occasion, I'll just pick it up and just read a paragraph, and I'll say that's pretty good. That's good stuff.
I don't think many people, especially those who haven't written a book, but might like to, understand what a transformative experience it is to write your book. It is a catharsis, and I've watched over and over people change during the process as they get out all of the things that, they're telling about their lives or whatever it is. They don't understand the healing themselves. Mm.
Yeah, there's something about the written word. I mean, a lot of people journal. It's not
Mm.
that different, except that journal typically isn't read by
Yeah.
several thousand people.
Yeah. Well, it's a great title. I love the title, and I love the title of your latest one, which is Empathipedia, Healing for Empaths and Highly Sensitive Persons, which is being held as a comprehensive manual on the ABCs of successfully navigating life as an empath, which is something that I think is badly needed. We're just beginning to understand the prevalence, of highly energetically sensitive people. I think, the new generations are incredibly sensitive, and there are many of the older ones who are sensitive but never understood. That's why they feel so much.
Yeah,
Mm.
my typical client is probably middle age, and it goes to the latter part of what you were just saying, where they always feel like they didn't belong. They were called too sensitive. They didn't know what to do with all these incoming
Mm.
energies,
Mm.
and I channeled steps that make it much easier to exist and even thrive as an empath or highly sensitive person. So Empathipedia came out of 2018, I think it was, and it was sort of an update. Well, let's say sort of. It was an update to self care for the self aware. It's 2.5 times the length. It's much more detailed. It confirms and reestablishes the basis that were created in the first book, and then expands upon them. And it even has an A to Z section. Each section, A, abandonment, B, or, every letter has a common diagnosis and explains what those are about and steps to then heal them, understand them first, and then of course to heal them. And so that one's done pretty well too. So knock wood, pretty blessed with that. Um, So, and it's an end result of doing the work. Like we're saying before, it's not just about reading, it's about actually doing it. In this case, I'm teaching and guiding people through these processes. So it just made sense. It was time to update the information to go into more detail. So that one came out then.
Are you working on a fourth book?
Yes. The title is still in flux, but I've been teaching a course for the last 2 years, both with Shift Network and on my own, called Healing the Original Wound,
Mhm.
or Healing Abandonment Wounds, or Healing the Four Original Wounds. There's all different titles that are kind of floating around. And I know when it comes to time to really master the book, the title will come. So I'm trying not to freak out and worry about it too much. In the meantime, I'm putting all the text together, and um, it's really interesting because I think it takes everything we've discussed already and brings all of that to an even deeper level. Like I always want to go deeper as a medical intuitive. I don't just accept that's a symptom. I say, what's the actual cause? And that's just the way I've always thought about things. We don't, without addressing the root cause of anything, nothing's going to really transform. You might get temporary relief. And if that's what you need and all you can get, go for it. I mean, that's not wrong. And there's also potential of much deeper healing.
Yeah.
So it came to me over the last few years about how much abandonment we experience, even in the first few minutes and first few years of our lives, and how that affects even present day situations, whether you're 20 or 90, we're still somewhat guided and governed by and affected by these abandonment wounds. One of the reasons we want to connect so badly is because we disconnect initially. And it was shown to me, and I try to put it in the book in as clear as possible language. There is a reason for all of this. I mean, we hear all the time, like there's a reason for that, a reason for this. And what I kept hearing and seeing was we learn about life and ourselves through duality and contrast. And we're all one at our core. So what better lesson to learn about our oneness than to learn about separation first? And all the things that come with separation, including pain, potentially illness, a lot of challenges. It helps us appreciate the reconnection, not just to ourselves, but to spirit, to each other, to be able to go deeper and have more heart-based connections that are spiritually aligned for us. And to make a very simplified analogy, someone who's born into money does not typically have the level of appreciation for it as someone who's gone bankrupt and then made a lot of money, right?
Mhm.
Like Tony Robbins, one of the most powerful, teachers around. He talks about when he was 19 years old, making his first $1 million, and then he lost it. And then he made it again and he lost it. And all of his investors started questioning. I think he told the story once about a sixth or seventh time, asking a particular individual for a fair amount of money to pursue creating some kind of program. And the guy said, "Why should I give this to you? You've failed at everything you've done so far." And he just said, "I haven't failed at all. I've learned what not to do."
Yeah.
Very simple, very basic, but I think an important reminder. So similar kind of thing. If we were born super healthy, with great relationships already at our beck and call, completely connected to spirit, and with a complete awareness of who we are and why we're here, there'd be no journey. And we wouldn't appreciate knowing all of these things. So we separate on multiple levels: spiritual, physical, emotional. And we also separate from our own selves in the first few years of life, where we morph ourselves to be how everyone else wants us to be. So the book describes it in a lot more detail. Of course, the courses, go into it in much more detail. And we're really healing those very deep, painful
Yeah.
layers of wounding that, again, I think are affecting us to this day. So if something, if you've done, quote unquote, a lot of work around a particular issue and nothing's shifted, and it's beautiful that you're doing something, and I'm not putting it down in any way, but in some cases, it's kind of like painting a rusty bridge.
Yeah.
You got to get in and remake the bridge or clean off the rust or something to have a real powerful, lasting, transformative effect. And fortunately, even though this work that I'm describing now is a lot more difficult than things I've done or taught in the past, very blessed to be able to attract a level of clientele that are really willing to do the work. Of course, resistance comes up here and there. And the beautiful thing about resistance is it actually is a beautiful thing. Beautiful thing. It actually shows what needs to be healed next. It's not a wall saying, don't go there. It's a warning sign saying, if you're going to go there, do it lovingly and compassionately, and ideally with a guide that understands these things. And in that safe container, people can really begin to shift some things on a very deep level. So hopefully that'll be out soon. I don't know exactly when.
Look forward to reading that one when it comes out. We are almost out of time now. I really want to thank you for joining us and for adding your 10 best list of books that influenced you the most to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's archive of recommendations. Having these recommendations from people like yourself, people who have walked the path, is so important to others that are just waking up. So thank you for your contribution.
Of course. And thank you so much for inviting me and just being awesome.
It's been fun. That's it for this week. This show is also available as a free downloadable podcast on the Om Times website, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Amazon, and Audible. And of course, it's also available as a video on YouTube. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, goodbye from me, and thank you again to Dave Markowitz.